Thanks, Gail, and thank you guys for your generous donations. Boy, we love the Thinkery. But for now, we should talk about fires. I see one. I'm Aaron Franklin from Franklin Barbecue here in Austin, Texas, and we've got about 10 minutes, and I thought it might be a cool 10 minutes to talk about how to work a fire. So a question that came up, can you save a bad fire with a good piece of meat, or can you ruin a great piece of meat with a bad fire? And the answer is kind of like no and yes. The fire that you build is really the flavor that you're putting on the meat. If you're grilling and it's a higher heat, or if you're smoking something at offset, all the different combustion ranges of the fire changes the solubility of it. So if anybody's ever had barbecue where you kind of cough up, smoke, that's because that was a dirty fire, and that was an oil-soluble fire. So that was creosote and stuff that you're tasting. There, once it hits about, 588 degrees or so, you start to ignite wood in a clean manner. And once you get there, you get more water solubility. So if you think about if you're cooking a protein or you're cooking a piece of meat, it actually is water-based. So the water-soluble particulate out of that smoke is actually going to stick to the water-based protein as opposed to the nasty stuff that's going to stick to the fat. So you can kind of pick and choose the flavors you want. If you've got a cold piece of meat that you put on that's kind of sweaty and it's got salt, then it's really important to burn a clean fire so those clean fire flavors get on there. And some of those flavors, Post Oak's really good at this because it has not much tannic acid. But once you get into like the cleaner flavors, you start to get the vanillas and some of the sweeter flavors that you might get from wine, or you might get out of whiskey and charred barrels and stuff like that. So if you kind of think about it in that context, it's a little bit helpful. But like every fire, if you wanted to make it burn for a long time, you could just choke off the air supply, and that's when the creosotes come in and stuff like that. So that's kind of where you get that real heavy, like kind of the darker flavors that aren't quite so transparent. You don't want to build a big fire and cook everything at 600 degrees. That's kind of silly, but that's where kind of knowing how to pick a piece of wood, let it ignite, let it lay down, and then just kind of move it in and out and just kind of arrange the fire. That's kind of, I guess, how I came up with working a fire like this. A lot of people, the old school way is like, well, just throw a log on and shut the door and it'll be fine. But there are a lot of different ways to work a fire, but if you really want to think about the flavors that you're putting onto the meat, the levels of smoke, how that smoke is, the solubility of that smoke, then you want to really try to dial in the combustion temperature through wood selection and just arranging the airflow. These rules kind of apply for anything, but really I think it's worth it to spend some time on this stuff. I've got a fire started right here in this, it's a pretty large firebox, I suppose. But the same rules apply if you're gonna do a small firebox, if you're just playing around with a fire pit in the backyard, if you're fiddling around with a grill, doesn't really matter. The idea of how wood burns is pretty much the same anywhere in the world. So if you're kind of going through some wood, and say you've got this stack, right? That's kind of what you want to be able to pick out a piece of wood to not be so smoky, but to give you better heat. So that, to me, I would maybe pick up a piece, and if it's lighter than you think it's going to be, it's probably pretty dry, and it's going to catch really quick. It won't last a real long time, but you'll get a quick heat out of it. So you can apply that to standing around a fire pit, and you don't want it super smoky. You pick the light piece because you want warmth and flames, but you don't want a lot of smoke. So you could also put that towards cooking. And say you're cooking some ribs, or you're cooking a brisket on an offset smoker, or you're just going to grill something. If you want quick heat, you would pick a light piece that's going to catch quick, not give you much smoke, like this one. So we'll throw it in. And then say on the opposite side of that, you're early on in a brisket cook and you do want to get a little bit of smoke and you want kind of a slower heat. I like to think of like the heat as like a fast and slow kind of thing. Then you might pick a piece of wood that seems abnormally heavy, and that means that it has a lot of moisture in it, and that means that it's going to burn slower, it's going to take longer to ignite, but it's also going to smoke a little bit. So then you get this piece, and even though it looks like it might be kind of light, it's way heavier than I thought it was going to be. So I know that this has a lot of moisture, it's going to burn slow, but it's also going to smoke. So when you're thinking about standing around a fire pit and it's really smoky, it's these really heavy, dense logs versus the really light ones. If it's a big piece, it's obviously going to take longer, it's going to burn slower, it'll certainly last longer than a small piece. But if we look into this fire right here, we'll kind of get into how to arrange it. So I've got this lighter piece right there, and obviously it's caught pretty well. With something like this, your number one tool is going to be a shovel, also known as a shovel. And that kind of helps you knock some stuff around, get some coals. So if I've got this lighter piece sideways right there, it's going to get a little air hitting it, and it's going to actually ignite the rest of the fire to get a cleaner combustion. But if I want to slow it down a little bit, I might just put it congruent to the fire and then lay it down, and you can see the flames just kind of backed off right there and got a little bit smokier. So that's kind of how you speed up and slow down your fires, and you kind of are able to pick your firewood to do what you need it to do. So that gets into what you're cooking and how you're cooking it. So I've got this lighter piece right there, and this one feels about like I thought it was going to feel. It's not too heavy, it's not too light, it's going to burn pretty quick. So say we just put that right there. The reason why I would put it like that is to kind of guide the fire to do what I think I want it to do. You know, I picked a piece that wasn't too heavy, wasn't too light. It's going to catch pretty quick, but then once it gets to that middle part where it's more dense, it's going to slow down its heat. But you can see right there, it caught really quick. But again, if I want a little bit of a smokier fire, you could just kind of lean it down right there. That's essentially all I'm doing when I'm cooking barbecue in a cooker. Is I'm just kind of letting the heat go up, and I'm just kind of guiding a log through placement like that, and also through wood selection. So anyway, that's kind of the basics of building a fire. The one tip that I can always throw out there on how to make any cooking or any barbecue better is just patience. Like, you can't force something to get tender too quickly. You can't develop deep layers of flavors in 30 minutes. Just be patient. You can't speed it up. You can't fake it. I think for barbecue, you can only get out of it what you're willing to put into it. You can't cheat the system. It's just take your time and enjoy yourself. I really got started in barbecue just, I think, by default, by being a Texan. But Stacy and I, we got our first apartment about almost 20 years ago, actually, and went out and bought a little barbecue pit and bought a brisket and built a fire, and I was kind of hooked. You know, it's just like the wood and all the details that go in. And, you know, I like to take things apart, but I also like to build things. And it's like every time you do a painfully long brisket cook, you learn something, you get to build something up, and then you get this payoff of having your friends, family over. But yeah, I really just love the process, and it's been a constant evolution, and it still is. You know, I think one of the things that really makes people good at barbecue, or also helps me be good at other things, is that I'm not necessarily afraid to fail. You know, we've got the raddest little 6-year-old in the world. And one of the things I always tell her is, like, you know, she'll want to do something, and it's like kids get so frustrated when it doesn't work out. And like, obviously, of course, it's really frustrating, but to be able to learn from that and to be able to go into something almost fearless, just to try and just to have an idea, as wacky as it might be and as kooky as, like, this is never going to work, don't shut it down. Just try it. It might work. And if it does work, it might be awesome. I mean, I think that's kind of the gist of it, really. It's just, if you got a cool idea, try it. And so what if it doesn't work? Try it again. Well, thanks a ton for watching, and hopefully learning a little something about fires. Now I'm going to throw it back to some of my favorite cheesy people in town, John and Kendall Antonelli.